But first, last week and over the weekend, former PM Tony Abbott became the first former Australian Prime Minister to visit Ukraine. After a 24-hour flight, a 6-hour drive, then a 12-hour train ride, last Thursday, Tony Abbott addressed the Kyiv Security Forum, reaffirming Australia's commitment to Ukraine, but to also stress that there is a lot more our country can do. This is, of course, a personal matter for the former PM. He witnessed firsthand the brutality of the Putin regime when MH17 was shot down over Ukraine, killing 38 Australians. Joining me now to discuss his visit, former PM Tony Abbott. Tony, welcome. You were asked to address this security forum. Who else was there and what was your message?
There were lots of other people there. George W. Bush was there. Boris Johnson was there. General Petraeus was there. They were all there by video link, though. A former Estonian Prime Minister and myself were the only former heads of government that were there in person. But I thought, Peter, that it was very important to show solidarity on the ground with the Ukrainian people, because they aren't just fighting for their own freedom, they're fighting for freedom everywhere. If dictators can get away with genocidal war in one part of the world, there's no reason why they won't try it in our part of the world too. And just on that point, Peter, we did very well helping the Ukraine last year. Scott Morrison sent bushmasters, Anthony Albanese sent Australian trainers to help train the Ukrainian army in Britain. But we haven't done anything much this year. I'm very much hoping when the Prime Minister goes to NATO in July, he goes armed with a big new package of assistance, including more bushmasters and some of the Hawkeye light armoured cars, because let's face it, we've got 1,000 bushmasters and we've got about 1,000 Hawkeyes, and I reckon they would be more useful in Ukraine fighting for freedom than sitting in a depot here in Australia.
I'll get to this talk over the weekend of a counter-offensive that's, we're told, shortly to be launched by Ukraine. But I read through the transcript of your remarks. You got pretty personal about Vladimir Putin, and this all goes back to MH17. Not many people sort of muscle up to him. I saw former PM2 Poroshenko was there with you in Ukraine. Do you think that Putin looks and feels under threat here? Do you think the war's starting to close out?
There's no doubt that the Russians have comprehensively failed so far. Still, let's not underestimate what Putin is trying to do. The Russian dictator is trying to recreate Greater Russia, and yes, Ukraine is the current target, but if he succeeds in Ukraine, the Baltic states, Georgia, Moldova, and indeed Poland are next. And of course, if Putin succeeds in Ukraine, obviously the commissars in Beijing will renew their interest in seizing Taiwan as quickly as possible. This is why what's happening in Ukraine is so important, not just for the people of Ukraine, who are under terror attack on a daily basis, but for the wider world, including people here in Australia.
I might say to people there that picture of former Prime Minister Poroshenko, he actually now runs a reserve army team. This is how hands-on even important people are in Ukraine to defend their country. I want to move to other issues about the voice, Tony, but this counter-offensive against the Russian forces, what can you tell us? When's it likely to kick off, without giving the game away to the Russians, of course? And the morale of the country, because I look around the world and I fear we're moving off, as we do with news cycles, away from this issue. How are the Ukrainians on the ground coping?
Look, they're bearing up remarkably well, but let's not underestimate the pressure they're under. Every night, Putin is unleashing terror raids against defenceless civilians on civilian targets. I think just last night there was something like 54 missiles that Putin aimed at Kyiv. Just about all of them were shot down. But what that means for the inhabitants is not only are they having to bear the extraordinary cost of this war, but most of them are working during the day and sheltering in air raid shelters at night, which puts enormous strain on people. So that's why I think it's incumbent upon us to do whatever we can to help, and that's why I thought it was important for me personally to show solidarity with the Ukrainian people, particularly given all the help they gave us when Putin's first invasion resulted, amongst other things, in the death of 38 innocent Australians.
I'll tell people at home too, Tony had a number of conversations with Ukrainians in order to be able to get our police and military in to retrieve bodies in what was a contested zone. So we do owe the Ukrainians a lot there. Let's go to The Voice. Michael Chaney, very serious businessman, of course, out today lecturing us, though, if we don't vote yes for the PM's referendum, we'll make ourselves an international pariah. I made a point at the top of the show. Well, there's no voice for Native Americans in the US Constitution. There's no voice for the Anglo-Saxons in the British Parliament. So why on earth would we lose friends by not supporting, as we shouldn't support, a racialised constitution?
Well, this is a very good point, Peter. Why should anyone think less of us here in Australia for not doing what none of them do? I mean, no country on earth, to my knowledge, certainly no liberal democracy, to my knowledge, is proposing to give special rights to a small percentage of the population that they don't extend to everyone else. I mean, we all want to see recognition, but this is not Indigenous recognition. This is about activist power. The idea that less than 4% should have a special say over what happens to 100% of us, it's just wrong in principle. And the way, frankly, the government is trying to rig the results, and the way, frankly, people are trying to morally intimidate us into voting a particular way, I just think is wrong.
You pushed Mark McGowan pretty hard a couple of months ago to release the advice that he had, legal advice, to the Premier on the issue of The Voice. He refused to release it. It's still secret advice. Given he's going on Friday, it'd be nice if he released it between now and then, surely, or that the leader that follows him perhaps puts it out publicly.
Well, it would be, but I don't expect it. What we've seen from the broad left in Australia on this issue is just a whole lot of sneaky behaviour. Not releasing legal advice, not being upfront about everything that this voice might mean, giving a different message to the Indigenous leadership, to the message that they're giving to the general public. Really, they're trying to push this through, the biggest constitutional change we've ever been asked to make. They're trying to push it through on the vibe. And again, Peter, I think it's just wrong in principle, and it would be very damaging in practice.
Bridget Archer, just before we go, Bridget Archer, Tasmanian Liberal, says you've got to junk the coalition, at least in opposition, in order to win government. Well, given you're the last Liberal to actually win from opposition, with a coalition, of course, with the National Party, should Peter Dutton listen to Bridget Archer?
Well, history shows that the Liberal Party does best when it's in a strong coalition with the National Party. And the interesting thing about recent elections is that the National Party hasn't lost a single seat, I think, in the last 5 elections. And why wouldn't you stick with the strength? As you know well, Peter, you do not win elections by agreeing with your opponents. You win elections by creating a contest. You win elections by being a clear alternative, and from where I sit, that's exactly what Peter Dutton intends to be, a clear and strong alternative to the Labor Party.
Tony Abbott, I appreciate you've been up now for, 48 hours or something, so you're very kind to join us this evening. Hope you get a good night's sleep, and I'm sure we will see you again soon.